Hello everyone, welcome to course International Organization and Global Governance, Chapter 7, States and Global Governance. Let's start with learning objectives. At the end of this chapter, you will be able to explain the concepts of power and great power in international relations. You can identify the role of great powers in great power management. You can define the concept of hegemony and evaluate the hegemonic stability theory. And also, you can discuss the role and the impact of states in global governance. In this chapter, there are four main titles. The first title deals with the concepts of power and great power in international relations. The second one deals with the great power management. The third one deals with the concept of hegemony and hegemonic stability. And finally, the chapter focuses on the role and impact of states in global governance. Let's start with the concepts of power and great power in international relations. What is power in international relations? Power refers to states' ability to control or at least influence other states or outcome of events. So there are three basic types of power. The first one is hard power, the second one is soft power, and the third one is smart power. The hard power refers the power in terms of military power. Soft power means the ability of state to persuade other countries, other states, without using their hard power, but using their cultural power, using their intellectual power, using their economic power, maybe. And smart power is the type of power that combines both hard power and soft power. So states using, for instance, military power and cultural or intellectual influence can be considered as smart power. There are also concepts like great power, superpower, and hegemon in international relations literature. Great powers can be considered as the major powers within a multipolar system. We can, for instance, sometimes refer to great powers as superpowers. Superpowers is a great power within a bipolar system, is a major power in bipolar system. For instance, we define United States and Soviet Union as superpowers during the Cold War. And the hegemon is a country that performs some sort of leadership within the international system. So sometimes these words are concepts are using interchangeably. So we should pay attention to the distinction between them. There are some sort of criteria for being a member of Great Power Club. These are, for instance, first one is great powers are the first rank of military prowess, having the capacity to maintain their own security and potentially influence other states. And also they are economically powerful states. Although this is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for a great power status, you can, as a state, you can be economically powerful, but if you don't have enough military powers, so you are not identified as a great power. And the third one is that great powers have global, not merely regional sphere of interest. So there are some regional powers as well. And finally, they adopt a forward foreign policy and have actual, not merely potential impact on international affairs. So these are the criteria of the members of the Great Power Club. In terms of great power management refers to the management of relations with one another in the interest of order. In terms of, like the management of relations between great powers, management of relations within the international system in the interest of international order. There are some means of great power management. For instance, great powers manage relations through preserving the general balance of power. They can manage international relations through seeking to avoid or control crises in their relations with one another, or through seeking to limit or contain wars among one another. They exploit their preponderance in relation to the rest of the international society by unilaterally exploiting their local preponderance. They can manage their relations by agreeing to respect one another's spheres of influence. They can also manage their relations with one another through joint action, as is implied by the idea of a great power concert or condominium. So there are some examples in the history of the great power management. For instance, the Concert of Europe in the 19th century was a telling example of great power management in international history, and also the relations between superpowers during the Cold War can be given as an example of great power management. During the Cold War, the international system was bipolar, and the superpowers, United Nations, United States, and Soviet Union, acted as superpowers, as the bloc leaders, so they manage their relations and they keep their allies within their blocs under their influence. So this is an example of great power management. So let's move to the concept of hegemony and hegemonic stability theory. What is hegemony? Hegemony is the concentration of power in one state and the capacity of that state to use that power to project and sustain its own power. What a hegemon has, what a hegemon wants, and what a hegemon does is, for instance, the hegemon has material power capabilities. Hegemon is willing to exercise that power over other states and over the international system, and hegemon has the relationship between hegemon and other states. In other terms, hegemon manage the relationship between the hegemon and the other states. So there is a theory in international relations which is called hegemonic stability theory. This theory links the hegemon and the systemic stability. So it says that a hegemon can provide political and economic stability within the international order, which is also in favor of both other states and in favor of the hegemon itself. And there are two types of hegemony in terms of hegemonic stability. The first one is the benevolent hegemony. In this type of hegemony, the hegemon provides international goods without sharing burden with other states. So because that hegemon is benevolent. And the other one is the coercive hegemony. Again, in this type of hegemonic stability, hegemon provides international goods for other states, but it also forces other states to share the burden of providing these goods. So this is the second type of hegemony in international relations. So let's move on to the role and the impact of states in global governance. There are some classification of nation states. We know that there are great powers, there are middle powers, and there are small powers. Great powers are much more active in international politics. They are in a better position to determine the rules of global governance. So they are influential actors within the international system, within the global governance. Middle powers, on the other hand, is the group of states which is one that is neither great nor small powers in terms of its power, capacity, and influence. Middle power exhibits the capability to create cohesion and obstruction towards global order and governance. For instance, the most apparent example of middle powers is the BRICS countries, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Maybe we can consider Russia and China nowadays like a great powers in terms of their military, economic, and political powers. But in the late 90s and in the beginning of 2000s, these countries are considered emerging middle powers. And the third type of nation states are small powers. They generally need support of a big power that has capacity to steer international affairs. The group of vulnerable 20 is the example of small powers. This group includes 20 less developed and vulnerable countries within the global governance. So in this chapter, we have focused on the concepts of power and great power in international relations. We discuss great power management. We consider the concept of hegemony and hegemonic stability theory. And this chapter also focuses on the role and the impact of states in global governance. Thank you very much for joining me.